So as Joyce said, I am the Director of Training at the New England ADA Center, and I will explain a little bit about what the ADA Center is in a moment. I'm in my home office in Boston, which is also my dining room. I've been working from home for quite a while. And I used to live in Vermont and spent a lot of time at the Kellogg Hubbard Museum in Montpelier. So I'm particularly interested, and I'm aware of some of the issues that New England libraries have and Vermont libraries have in terms of being small, in terms of being historic, in terms of not having much money. So I do want to tell you a little bit about our center. When the ADA was passed, Congress decided it was sufficiently confusing that they needed to provide what they call technical assistance. And so they set up this national network of ADA centers, and we all have the same toll-free number. So if you call it from your area code 802, you will get the New England ADA Center. And we all do the same thing. We're not enforcement agencies. We really exist to explain to people with disabilities what their rights are, and to explain to businesses and cities and towns what their obligations are. We have web courses, we do trainings, and we also just answer questions. So this toll-free number, you will get either Stacy Hart or Jason Angel, and you can ask any kind of ADA question. It doesn't just have to be about your library. It could be about employment, or maybe you have a child who's having difficulty and has a disability with their school district. So we will answer any disability-related questions. A few of the material that we've created for municipalities. This is our Title II Action Guide. So this is if you really want the big picture on what your town has to do. And it goes through all of the steps to implement the ADA. You probably are more concerned about your library. You may not want to go this broad, but if you are interested in kind of getting into more detail, this is a really good resource for you. The other thing we developed was a checklist for existing facilities. So when the 2010 ADA standards came out, the original standards were 1991, and then they were overhauled in 2010, and we developed this checklist. It's not every aspect of the ADA, but it's the chief things about getting in, being able to get to the services, the toilet room, and things like that. So if you're going to be doing a survey, or if you just want to look through, you don't necessarily have to do a survey, but it's a nice short list of the things that you should be thinking about when you're thinking about accessibility for your buildings. The New England ADA Center is a project of this wonderful nonprofit organization called the Institute for Human-Centered Design. We're an international design and education nonprofit. We really are focused on making sure that design, and it's all different kinds of design of websites, urban design, building design. It's sort of the whole world of design, design of material, print material that people are going to be reading. We are interested in making sure that that reaches a broad range of people, and it's going to work for a broad range of people. A little bit of background. There are two major federal disability rights law. One is called Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act, which was passed in 1973. And that applies to any entity that receives federal financial assistance. And I know back when I was in Vermont, there was a lot of federal revenue sharing money. So there was 504 obligations, and I think federal revenue sharing has gone, but there are certainly other federal funds that your city or town is receiving. And then 1990, the Americans with Disabilities Act was passed, and that doesn't have anything to do with whether or not you're receiving federal funds. And one of the reasons I bring this up is just to show you, like, this is not exactly hot news. We've had these obligations for decades, and hopefully your city or town has taken it seriously and has developed a transition plan, which all municipalities were required to do a self-evaluation. So there were things that were required way back in the 1990s after the ADA was passed. Where you are in the ADA, so there's 5 titles. Title I is employment, and that certainly applies to you, but that's not what we're going to be talking about today. Title II, state and local governments. That's your title. Title III is the private sector. Title IV had to do with telecommunications, and Title V is sort of where they put everything that they couldn't figure out what to do. Just a little bit of information. We did research on all of the states in New England, really trying to figure out what kind of disabilities people had, what the percentages, what people with disabilities. And not surprisingly, because New England is an aging population, and our young people tend to leave and our old people tend to stay behind. Our data in New England and in Vermont is higher than the national average. So the national average for who has a disability is more like 22 or 23%, but in Vermont, it's 28%. And then you can see the division was significant disability, upper body limitation, mental disability, canes, crutches, walkers, hearing difficulty, vision difficulty, and uses a wheelchair. Actually, a very small percentage of people actually use wheelchairs. And the other thing we thought was very important to understand is that, you know, we tend to think about people who are blind. Okay, so just to quickly say that it's not just people with apparent disabilities. We also have people with non-apparent disabilities. This is just sort of an FYI. We are going to be talking mostly about architectural access issues, but I just, really want to point this out. And we do get a lot of calls from libraries about people who have behavioral issues, and can be, very disturbing for other patrons. And yes, people are considered to have a disability, someone on the autism spectrum, and somebody with Tourette syndrome. So the guy on the bottom right has Tourette syndrome, and he's uncontrollable tics and grimaces, and sometimes people swear, and that can be extremely uncomfortable for other people. The woman on the top right is Temple Grandin, and she is quite a well-known person on the autism spectrum, and she works a lot with animals. She's a professor, but she has difficulty with social interaction. She doesn't look people in the eye, and so that it tends to be pretty common for people on the autism spectrum. And then just thinking about these three broad categories of functional limitation: physical, sensory, and brain-based. It's sort of a good overall way to think about the population of people that we want to make sure are included. So let's talk about facility accessibility. And I know there's money coming into Vermont, there's money coming into all the states, and hopefully some of this money is going to help all of you to make your buildings more accessible. Now, when it comes to new construction, additions, and alterations, it's fairly simple. It's not necessarily cheap, but it's fairly simple. You need to comply with both the ADA standards for accessible design and also the Fire and Building Safety Code. And they're pretty lined up. There are a few things that are a little bit different. There are a few things in Vermont that require more accessibility, but they're fairly lined up, and the code officials are very aware of what the accessibility requirements are. So, any questions about that, you can certainly contact them. And the standards are very much focused on people who use wheelchairs. When the standards were being developed, and actually before the standards were developed, when all of this accessibility came into being, and it was actually after World War II and after the Korean War, because so many people came back disabled and they couldn't function. They couldn't go to school, they couldn't get a job because they were using wheelchairs, and they couldn't get in the buildings. So it was really the veterans who initiated this whole movement to make things accessible. So even though it's a very small percentage of the population, it does tend to be people with mobility disabilities, and that tends to be one of the big expenses in terms of making buildings accessible, and we will go down through what the requirements are. We get a lot of questions. We have a lot of buildings that were built before the ADA went into effect. On the left, we have a Carnegie Library, and some of you may have Carnegie libraries. This one is in Wyoming. And then the one on the right, which is not a Carnegie library, is actually the library where I live, which is in Jamaica Plain, which is part of Boston. And if you can see that car at the very bottom and also the parking sign at the very bottom, you can see where the sidewalk was. So it was a very charming entrance, but it had very, very steep stairs. Now, Boston underwent a big effort to make all of the libraries accessible. And so this is what we ended up with. Of course, it cost a lot of money. Over here on the right, you can see the original building. They did nice things, like they put in this outdoor seating area. And this is what the building looks like from the front. So very nice, but not cheap. When the Department of Justice was writing the regulations for the ADA, they were thinking, what are we going to require of all of these old buildings? Are we going to require that they all be made accessible in 3 years? And there was a lot of opposition from states and cities and towns who said, we can't afford for you to require that all of our buildings be made accessible. So they sort of turned it around and said, okay, we want to make sure your programs, your services, and your activities, when viewed in their entirety, must be accessible to people with disabilities. So what that means is, and I'm not sure this is totally going to apply to you because I think most Vermont towns have one library, but for a larger city, it means you don't necessarily have to make all of your libraries accessible, or you don't need to necessarily need to make every floor accessible. You need to make sure that there's enough accessibility and enough libraries that are accessible so people can access that basically service that you're providing in terms of library services. So here is a illustration from the Department of Justice. And of course, it's quite exaggerated, but they are saying basically that if you cannot make your building accessible, here's another way of providing program accessibility. You would have the librarian bring the books out to somebody who's parked in the parking lot or parked outside. So this is a bit of an exaggeration, but they were trying to get across that you're not necessarily going to be able to make every building accessible. And then there also, I don't know if you have bookmobiles in Vermont, but also talking about that same thing, which they've got a call button there on the bookmobile. And so the person comes out, the bookmobile is not wheelchair accessible, but the librarian, the person in the bookmobile, is going to bring books out to the person who can't get in. So this is one of the biggest questions we get, which is how much access is required for the older buildings. You're not required to bring them up to a new construction standard. So new construction, 60% of the entrances would need to be accessible. You're really not required to do that for older buildings. You're required to provide enough access to make sure that people can participate. And this is actually a voting place, and they're using a temporary ramp. Now, you could use something like that, but it would need to be, you can use a metal ramp like this, but it really would need to be on the building at all times. They have a portable ramp also that goes from the parking to the sidewalk to get people in. So we need to comply with this program access requirement. And there is no grandfather, so there's no saying there's absolutely no obligation at all. This is Camden, Maine. This is a historic building, and they did quite an ingenious thing. They blasted into the rock, and they created a whole new entrance, which has the accessible bathroom in it. So one of the nice things about being able to put on an addition or doing this kind of renovation is it can take care of making your restroom accessible in addition to creating an accessible entrance. A little bit about historic preservation, and this is another Carnegie Library. This is in Lebanon, New Hampshire. So in terms of historic preservation, yes, the ADA applies, but you're not required to do anything that would threaten or destroy the historic significance of the building. And that decision about threatening or destroying needs to be made by your state historic preservation officer. What they did here is they made a side entrance accessible. They determined really that the entire front entrance was historic and it would threaten and or destroy. But the other important thing is, if you see how many steps there are, there's probably 5 or 6 steps, and every step is about 6 inches. So that's a huge height change, and that would take a huge ramp. Basically, you take up the entire front lawn, and many libraries don't even have that space. And the other thing is a big zigzag ramp. People aren't going to want to use it. They'd rather have a side entrance that's accessible, that's easier to use. So yes, there's the historic preservation, but look at this building and look at the stairs and look at the handrails. These were new. So these brick stairs and the handrails are not historically significant. So this would be a place where they'd be able to put a ramp. It would not destroy the historic significance of the building. These were put in long after the building was built. So these are the key things. And actually, before I move on, are there any questions on what I've said so far about historic preservation or anything that we've talked about before? Joya, anything in chat?
No.
No. Okay. Anybody want to unmute themselves? I think you're able to do that and ask any questions. No, we're good to go. Okay. So these are really the 4 things that I think about, we think about when we're doing a survey or looking at a building. Can somebody get in? Can they get to the activities or services? Can they use the restroom? And there are a few other small things, like, do you have a visible alarm? If you have an alarm system, you should have a visible alarm for people who are deaf, so they can see it. And on the left is me, many years ago, doing an access survey, starting from the outside. And then on the right is some of our staff doing an access survey starting inside the building. And the things you really need if you're going to conduct a survey, and I'm not sure that's your plan, but if you're trying to figure out whether or not your building is accessible, somebody's going to need to do a survey. And so I use a tape measure, I use a door pressure gauge. We use a digital level because it's much easier, but you can just use a non-digital level, which is very expensive. You can get it at any hardware store. The digital levels tend to be about $60. We're doing surveys all over New England, so we have several digital levels. And in order to do the survey, you really need to get down on your knees. So this is, not an easy thing for anybody that has a mobility disability, but what you're doing is you're leveling the level, and then you're figuring out what the distance is between the ramp surface and the bottom of the level. And that's going to give you your ratio, and I'll go over the ratios in a moment. Also, getting helpful to have 2 people. You're surveying from for the width of the parking space. So the priority 1, approach and entrance, and an accessible route is 36 inches minimum. So that's one of the things you're going to be looking for. And we're also looking for, is there an accessible route from site arrival points? So this is new construction. So very easy to create the accessible routes from the site arrival points. We have a drop-off area, we have accessible parking, we've got people who are walking. And then this has a transportation actually right on the building site, which you're not going to tend to have, but some buildings have that. So we're looking for accessible routes from all the site arrival points. And then the other thing you want to be checking for is to make sure that you have accessible parking. So there's 2 kinds of accessible parking. There's car accessible parking, which is the one on the right. And if you notice, that access aisle is 60 inches minimum. And then, I'm sorry, the one on the left, and then the one on the right is what we call van accessible. And the access aisle is much larger. And the reason for the van accessible parking is that if somebody drives a van, their ramp or their lift is going to deploy from the side, usually from the passenger side, and they need that space in order to get out and to be able to maneuver. And that's also very helpful space for somebody who uses canes or crutches or a walker like this fellow, and he's getting out on the passenger side, on the driver's side. And we recommend that you have the access aisles between two spaces because you're only required to have one access aisle. So let's say you're required to have two accessible spaces. Well, this is a nice design because you're getting two accessible spaces with one access aisle. So it doesn't take up as much space. You're also required to have an above grade sign. Some people have the international symbol of accessibility on the pavement, which is fine. It's not required, but an above grade sign is required. And I know surfaces are a big issue in rural areas. You don't necessarily have everything paved. I'll go over the specifications in a minute. So this is the parking, and this is for your accessible routes as well. The surface needs to be stable, firm, and slip resistant. There's no list of materials you can and can't use, but I think pretty clear that image on the left with pebbles, not stable, firm, and slip resistant. So on the right, paved, very nice, but it doesn't necessarily have to be paved. You can use something like stone dust that's very well packed down very well. And this is a natural area, but you could do this in your parking lot as well. Really, or for any of your routes, for your accessible route, it's got to be stable, firm, and slip resistant. We are looking and hoping that the accessible route is going to coincide with the general circulation path. Of course, this is new construction, so they were able to do that, but not necessarily required. And as I said already, the accessible route width is 36 inches minimum. So one of the things that we're looking for when we do a survey of the accessible route is the cross slope. And that, again, that's where you'd have to get out the level. And so the cross slope should be basically what's called 2% maximum slope. It looks like it's level, feels like it's level, but it's giving enough of a slope in order for the water to drain. And that's how engineers tend to design things, so that there's drainage. So this is a very difficult slope for somebody, this very steep slope, for somebody who uses a wheelchair, for somebody who uses a walker, canes, crutches, many of us, actually, anybody with any kind of walking difficulty. Then the other thing we're looking for is what's called the running slope. So that's the slope in the direction that you're heading. And that slope needs to be what's called 5%. So that's a fairly gradual slope. It's really fairly easy to walk on. It's fairly easy to push. If it's steeper, if your route is steeper than 5%, then you have to design it as a ramp, and that gets really expensive. You've got handrails on both sides. It needs to have level spaces at the top and the bottom. So you really want to try to get, if you're designing or you're working with somebody who's designing an accessible route and you've got space for it, you want to have that accessible route be as gentle, as not steep as possible. It's also going to be easier if you've ever pushed somebody in a wheelchair up a ramp, or if you use a wheelchair, or even if you've pulled a suitcase that's heavy. You know that it's really difficult. It's quite an effort even to go up a slope that's 8.33% maximum slope. So that's the maximum slope for a ramp. So for the 1 in 12 means for every inch of height change between the ground and your threshold, you need to have at least 12 inches of ramp run. And I'll show you a few ramps. So I like this design because it gives the option between using stairs and using a ramp. Some people would prefer to use stairs. It's easier for them than going up a ramp. Also, very often the ramps are very long, and this is sort of a truncated view. But you can see there's handrails on both sides. The handrails have little 12-inch extensions. That gives a person a place to sort of rest and stand before they're going up, going down. There's a level area at the top. Really important that at your door, there's a level area at the bottom, level area where the ramp changes direction. And this is a nice design. It's a sidewalk design. And basically what they did is they just sort of raised part of the sidewalk in order to make the ramp. Nice design. They've got the handrails, again, with extensions, handrails on both sides. This is a barrier so that somebody's cane doesn't go through, or their the wheels of their the wheels on their wheelchair don't go through. So this is a required edge protection. A little bit more about historic buildings. If you have the space, this is really a nice solution, which is to put an addition on your building. And it also is a no ramp addition. So it's a level addition, again, preferable. So they were able to connect the museum without taking out the stairs by having the addition. And the addition gave them the visitor center, but it also gave them an accessible restroom. So this was a very nice design. Now, this is Harvard. Of course, Harvard has tons of money, and they had a very, very large project making all of their buildings accessible, including their historic buildings. And this is a very nice solution. They kept the stairs. They had room for the ramp. It ate up a bit of their landscaping. Nice design. They used brick. They really matched the fabric of the building. And then they used that opportunity to put in a nice seating area and sort of a gathering point. So sometimes when you're making things accessible, this is sort of an opportunity, like I showed you the library in Jamaica Plain. They created a little outdoor area. So it's sort of an opportunity, if you're doing this amount of work, to provide some amenities, to provide some gathering space, or just a place for people to be outside. Again, an illustration from the Department of Justice showing that, yes, sometimes your main entrance is not going to be able to be made accessible, and then a side entrance can be used. Now, the issue that's come up really in the last, I would say, 10 or 15 years has to do with security. And people tend to want just one entrance, to everybody to be going through one entrance. Of course, a lot of libraries do have a parking lot entrance and a front entrance, but I know some buildings, they really want to go down to one entrance. But if you have an accessible entrance and an inaccessible entrance, your accessible entrance has to be open the same hours as the inaccessible entrance. The sign is required, indicating, so when you have an inaccessible entrance, you need a sign directing people to the accessible entrance. And then they're showing this is not required, but it's a nice feature, because if somebody's coming from the parking lot or from the sidewalk, you kind of want to let them know before they actually get to the inaccessible entrance, where is the accessible entrance? So if you're looking at your space, you want to let people know as soon as possible where the accessible entrance is, with signage like this pointing to the accessible entrance. So as I said, if not all entrances are accessible, you want to provide signage. The regulations don't talk about what the signage has to say. It just says you need to provide it. You need to think a little bit about whether it's helpful and whether it makes sense. These are good signs. They have telling you exactly where the entrance is. I used to work all over the state of Massachusetts, and I went to meetings of the commissions on disability at night. And I remember going to Westport, Massachusetts, and I don't use a wheelchair, but I'm always thinking about, how is this design going to work for somebody who uses a wheelchair or canes or crutches? When I'm really looking at any building now. And so I got to the inaccessible entrance, and they had a sign, no arrow, that said accessible entrance south side. Now in Westport, maybe everybody knew which was the south side of the building, but I didn't have a clue which was the south side of the building. Certainly didn't have a compass with me. So if you're going to put up signage, you want to make sure it's helpful. It's saying enough to really help people. Automatic doors are not required, but they really are a wonderful design feature for everybody, particularly I think libraries where people are going to be holding books on their way out, but not required. One place that people do tend to use automatic door openers, particularly interior, is in existing conditions where it's very tight. And I'm going to be going over the door maneuvering clearance requirement. So if you can envision somebody coming down this corridor, maybe this is a restroom or whatever, and they're using a walker or they've got a wheelchair or they have canes, there's no maneuvering clearance. So this would be a place that would be very, very helpful to have an automatic door. So that's getting in the building. So before I move on to sort of access to services and activities, any questions about, the parking or the entrances, the design requirements? Anybody, any questions? Okay, I guess not. So now we're inside the building and we're looking for an interior accessible route. So keeping in mind that 36 inches, they've got a ramp in this building. They have an accessible route to the water fountains. They've got an accessible route to the public telephones, which I don't think any of us have anymore. And the other thing you do need to think about is vertical access. If your library is 2 stories or 3 stories, are you going to be putting in an elevator? There are also things called LULAs, limited use, limited access elevators, which you can use in alterations. You can also use wheelchair lifts in alterations. So you don't necessarily have to put in a full bore elevator. The other thing that I think program access would permit, although we're really looking to make the building accessible, but if you don't have space or you don't have the money, then you want to be thinking about that program accessibility solution, which is having a librarian available and letting people know that the librarian is going to get people that get books or whatever it is on the 2nd floor if somebody is unable to climb stairs. So that's sort of a temporary solution to not having vertical access. Barbara, you have a question?
Yeah. We are actually installing a lift. We have the permits and everything. They're supposed to start in November. We are installing them in our office, and it's a historic building. Everything's been approved. We have the permits, we have the workers starting, and now the Department of Fire and Safety says, oh wait, can you do this door backwards? Like the door to enter the office where the lift will be doesn't have the 18 inches. It's a historic entrance, so it would really mess things up historically. So our architect is almost like, you might need to just get rid of the door. I mean, the door is never closed when we're open, but I'm wondering if having an automatic door opener, if we can do that subtly where it won't mess up the historic. So that would be a solution, even though nobody would ever have to use it because the door is always open.
Right.
But
and the door being always open did not satisfy the code official, sounds like. Is that right?
Well, I guess I assume not.
Assume not, yeah. Yeah, you could use an automatic door opener in that situation because there are maneuvering clearance requirements, which I'm going to go over, and it sounds like you're knowledgeable about the 18 inches. And yes, in situations where you don't have door maneuvering clearances, generally you can use an automatic door opener to solve that issue. So
and that could be subtle, so it wouldn't mess with the historic integrity.
So is it a historic door that would be on the automatic door opener?
It is.
It is. I think yes, I think you could probably maintain the historic integrity. I do think you are required to have a sign on the door that indicates, let's go back. Well, maybe not. Maybe you're just required to have the button. Yeah, so in this kind of a situation, you really just you have the button. So, it should be fine in terms of historic preservation. Now, if you're concerned about historic preservation, I don't know who your state historic preservation office is, but you could contact them and maybe send them a photo and ask them, is this going to be an acceptable solution? Are you on the the Registry of Historic Facilities, Buildings?
Oh, yeah, we are.
Okay. So, yeah, I mean, you might want to check in with the state historic preservation officer just to make sure that you're not going to be in violation of any other federal requirements.
Thank you.
Yeah. Anybody else? I see a few things in chat. Joy, do you see anything that's question?
This is a comment about the 18-inch. This may not solve the 18-inch issue, but we use the historic door on the Life. I'm not sure what that, on the lift.
Oh, you used the historic door on the lift. Is that what the person's saying? I'm not sure. Can you unmute it if
Yeah, this is Gail in Bradford. So we had the same issue, but we were able to, we did extend the opening and we used the door so as not to lose it on the lift. Instead of using the lift door, this was attached to the lift. So it's beautiful. The part that opens is the beautiful old 250-year-old door. And there's a button next to it on the left. So it's automatic. It's beautiful.
Great. Thank you. Anybody else, Joy? I see.
No, there's no more questions in the
chat. Great. Yeah, hearing your solutions, I think is going to be helpful for everybody. So thank you. Thank you for including that. So I think I talked about the interior accessible route. One thing you want to think about, particularly in a library, where things are close together, you might have displays, you have your permanent shelves, but you also have racks with pamphlets or other things like that. So you do want to consider, maintaining that accessible route. So this is where I'm going to talk a little bit about door maneuvering clearances for anybody who doesn't quite understand it, because it is a little bit of a confusing concept, which is it's the space next to the door and your approach to the door so that the door isn't banging into you as you open it. And there are different requirements depending if you're on the push side of the door. So this is the push side of the door, and this is the pull side of the door. And on the pull side of the door, you're required to have more space, which sort of makes sense. On the push side of the door, somebody can just open the latch and go through. But on the pull side of the door, people talk a lot about this 18 inches. And 18 inches is really a minimum. 18 inches is not that wide. So really, if you can get more, if you can get 24 inches or 30 inches, even better. And then you also need to consider the direction of travel. So if this is what we call a forward approach, somebody's approaching the door forward, then you need 60 inches minimum in front of the door. This is going to change, and I'm not showing you all the door maneuvering clearance requirements because it's quite complicated. But if your approach is this direction or is this direction, this is called a hinge side approach, and this is called a latch side approach. Then these figures change. So this is something that you would look at, or whoever's doing a survey, or hopefully your architect is knowledgeable about that to make sure that you have the adequate door maneuvering clearances. This is for all your doors. The other thing you really want to look at is thresholds. Now, I know a lot of buildings in New England have marble thresholds, and they're often the one on the left, which is maybe an inch, but we are looking for a threshold that's no more than half an inch high, beveled. For an existing threshold, you could go up to 3/4 of an inch. If you're putting in a new threshold, it has to be half an inch high maximum and beveled. So that's the one on the right. So I want to talk a little bit about design features for people with limited manual dexterity or strength. And that gets into our controls like hardware, door hardware. So on the left, we have the round hardware, which we used to have every place, and we probably still do. But we're really looking for something that can be opened. What I call a closed fist. It's when I do a survey, I make a very loose closed fist and I see if I can open the door. So on the right, we've got examples of compliant hardware. So the loop type, got to make sure the loop is large enough so that somebody can get their hand in. Lever is really the most common. And then you're going to have the push bar, which is going to be on a lot of fire doors. And, that's going to allow somebody just kind of open the door and go through. And then for people with limited strength, certainly many of us in the elder population, we're looking at door pressure to open. And if you remember that door pressure gauge, which I showed you in the beginning, it is a tool that we use on our surveys to measure the door pressure. If you're getting complaints about your door pressure, and I think a lot of people get complaints about their restroom pressure, particularly if you have a closer, you're not going to get complaints. Not going to be a problem if you don't have a closer, but you do one. 5 pounds is not very heavy. It's pretty easy to open. So do want to consider your door pressure, and those things that close the door closers usually can be adjusted to lower the pressure. Okay, here we go. Is another photo, another image of that door pressure gauge. So I put it right where I'm opening the door. I break the latch and then put it right where I'm opening the door. And then there's a little O-ring here, and the O-ring ends up, and then this tells you the pounds. You have to have very good eyesight in order to do this, but that's what we use when we're measuring door pressure. A few design features for people who are blind. And on the left, we've got somebody who's using a service animal as their mobility technique. And on the right, we have somebody who's using a cane as their mobility technique. Some people use both, they switch back and forth, but most people, it's going to be one or the other. So one of the things that's required is tactile signage. Signs at permanent rooms and spaces, which would be things like restrooms. Maybe you have a conference room, meeting spaces, need to be have this visual contrast, but also need to have raised characters and braille. And all of the sign makers, it's been 32 years since the ADA went into effect. So really all of the sign makers know this, and they know what kind of signs need to be compliant. But this is where people mess up often. The sign has to be on the latch side, the handle side of the door. And that's because people who are blind need to orient themselves to something. They find the latch, they found the handle, and then they put their hand on the door, on the wall, to that side. It's at about 60 inches. It's not wheelchair height, it's really standing height. And then you need space here. If you see this little space here, adequate space, at least 18 inches, again, more is preferable, so that somebody can stand there outside the swing of the door. So this is where you want to make sure you put the signage. If you have signs that are providing information or direction, again, the contrast, you want simple fonts, you don't want oblique or script or italic. It really, signs are there to be read and understood. You're not required to have braille or raised characters, and I don't recommend you have braille or raised characters, because something like this, no one who's blind is feeling the walls and saying, gee, I wonder if, there's some sign here that happens to be for something. That's why they have to orient themselves. You only find braille at the jamb of the elevator and at doors where the handle is, on the wall where the handle is. But again, most of the sign makers are aware of this. If you are going to make a sign, even if you're going to put up a paper sign, if it's going to be there more than 7 days, it needs to comply. And you can do this, just use a a large font. 5/8 of an inch is the minimum, and I'm not exactly sure what that ends up being in terms of fonts. It might be 50, 55, 60. I'm not exactly sure. You want contrast, and again, you want to use a fairly simple font. Now, this is the other design feature for people who are blind. So somebody who's using a cane as their mobility technique is using the wall as their shoreline. So they're feeling something. They know that they're going down the corridor. And things that stick out can be dangerous for them. Now, these are all in compliance because the sign overhead is high, and I'll go through the specifications. The water fountain is in a little bit of an alcove, and the other things that stick out no more than 4 inches. So here is, I know it's a bit of a confusing diagram, but if you look down here, this is considered the area of cane detection, which means if there's an object that is 27 inches or lower, it doesn't have to be that the whole thing is 27 inches or lower, but the bottom edge, the bottom has to be 27 inches or lower. The cane is going to feel that before the person walks into it. If that was higher, the person wouldn't feel that. Their body would be walking into it before their cane detected it. So requirements for things like overhead signs, at least 80 inches minimum. And then if you are going to have things protrude and they're not in the area of cane detection, the maximum distance they can protrude into the space is 4 inches. Unless you have handrails on the wall, and I don't think you probably have handrails on the wall. We see that at assisted living. We see that at hospitals and things like that. So you want to be careful about protruding objects because you don't want people walking into things. Fire extinguishers, blow signs. It's very charming. A lot of town halls in New England have signs, and I think it's extremely helpful when you're going down the corridor to actually have the sign sticking out into the corridor rather than just against the wall. But you just have to make sure if you have that they're high enough. And then this is just an example I threw in. I was at a hotel and I was like, oh, I measured the light fixture and it's exactly 4 inches deep. So it's fine. It's not protruding too far. The bottom edge is higher than 27 inches. So it's not in the cane detection area, but it's not protruding too far. Careful underside of stairs. This is a lovely design, sort of a floating stair. It's also not in compliance because it doesn't have closed risers. So that's a hazard for people in terms of feet. But you might have underside of stairs that somebody can walk into. So here is a design solution. These are pretty standard. You put something up there that somebody is going to pick up with their cane again before they walk into the underside of the stairs. Now, the devil is in the details because I find very often the architects know what they're doing, the contractors know what they're doing, but the people who are buying the furniture or equipment are not really paying attention. So you want to make sure when you're purchasing equipment that or furniture that it's providing adequate knee clearance. This is the biggest mistake I find with libraries and other places as well, not providing adequate knee clearance. So very often people buy things that have an apron. If you had an apron here on this table, that would be problematic. So we're looking for 27 inches minimum to the bottom and 34 inches maximum to the top. And you don't have to memorize any of these figures. They're all in the checklist if you're going to be doing a survey. But it's one of the things to think about. And also your workstations. Do you have a workstation that's going to work for somebody who uses a wheelchair so that they can get underneath? Here's a library that, kind of blew it. And I'm sure they weren't thinking about it or, whatever, but there's no knee clearance here. And so, as I said, you want to make sure it's not just the building itself, but it's also the furniture that you're purchasing. Service counters. need to have a lower section. And that the height is 36 inches maximum for a length of 36 inches. This is a photo. This is a photo I took at my massage place, and I like it very much because the reason I took a photo is that the lower section is right in the middle. They didn't put it on the end like the U.S. Post Office always has their lower section at the end, and then they have plants on it and stuff like that. They put it right in the middle, and it's much more inviting to have it in the middle. It's much more inviting approach. And this is a photo I took in Hartford, Connecticut. You're not required to have the knee clearance at service counters, but this was a very nice design feature because if somebody's going to be writing something, they actually, in a wheelchair, they actually can get under the counter and that surface is low. And again, I really like this design because this is exactly where the guy is sitting. It's very open for everybody. Temporary solution, yes, you could use a clipboard. If somebody has to sign something or fill out a form or write on something. So a little bit about operable parts. They have to be in what's called reach range. And reach range is considered to be between 15 inches and 48 inches. Now, this does not apply to your shelves and your books. You can have things higher than 48 inches, but you want to think if you've got brochures and things like that, you want to make sure that you've got some of each of the brochures within this reach range. When somebody's putting in a light switch, and I actually do want to sort of take back what I said about architects and contractors. Before whoever's signing off on the work that's being done, you want to make sure it's compliant before you write that last check. Not all architects and contractors actually know what they're doing. And sometimes the architects know what they're doing and the plans are correct, but then the contractor sort of does what they want, or the plumber thinks, oh, it really would be a lot easier, to put the sink closer to the toilet because the plumbing fixtures are already there or whatever. We just find that it's kind of messed up all over the place. And you really do want to make sure that you are comfortable. Pull in your code official, pull in whomever you can to make sure that before that last check is written, that everything's in compliance. Do not assume. Okay, toilet rooms. Now, the big issue with toilet rooms for older buildings is the turning space. And turning space, because it's the size. You need a larger toilet room in order to have turning space. But it is a really key design feature because somebody who uses a wheelchair really needs that space in order to get under the lavatory, in order to back up. That space is really critical. Now, the door can swing in and it can swing into that turning space as long as you have one wheelchair space beyond the swing of the door. And also the turning space can use some of the space underneath the lavatory and for knee and toe clearance. So that's what we're looking for. But I find this is the biggest issue for restrooms in older buildings is they just don't have the space. The other thing we're looking for is that there be space between the lavatory and the toilet so somebody can actually make a side transfer onto the toilet. So this kind of a design does not work. This was permitted before 2010. This was a design that was permitted before 2010. But if you're doing renovations, you need to have the sink further from the toilet. So this is just a little demo to show you, okay, we've got the door maneuver and clearance. Now this is the push side of the door. And one of the things I recommend is that you have some kind of a protective plate, like the bottom 10 inches, because this guy is just going to kind of bash through the door because it's very difficult for him to open the door and get his wheelchair through. So a lot of people they wheel right through the door. So you do want to think about protecting your doors, particularly if you've got wood doors or any kind of door. The whole bottom of the door is going to get scuffed. So we've got maneuver and clearance here, going in, backing up. So this is the clearance requirement at the toilet itself, specifications for that. You see the grab bars on the back and the side, transferring on, the turning space. And this is smaller than it needs to be. I mean, the bathroom is larger than it needs to be because, as I said, that turning space can go under the lavatory. And then a clear floor space. So the wheelchair space is considered to be 30 inches minimum by 48 inches minimum length. And so that's what you're wanting to provide underneath underneath and at the lavatory. That's considered the wheelchair space. And then you see there's knee and toe clearance underneath. He can get underneath. You want to make sure that the pipes are insulated so that not going to burn his knees. And then the maneuvering clearance getting out. And yeah, let me just finish my sentence. And so you see here the 18 inches. Yeah. Question?
Yeah, there's a request to see the previous picture one more time.
Yeah. Let's go back. This one?
I'm not sure, Stacy, can you say which one? I think it might be the one before that.
The one with the turning space?
The one that had the X.
Say it again.
The one with the X of what not to do, I think.
Oh, way back. This one?
I think so, yeah.
Did you have a question or did you just want to look at it?
She just says, yes, thanks. So Stacy, do you have a specific question about that?
Okay. So, moving on, I think I took this photograph in a hotel. I don't think any of you are going to have fancy sinks like that, but you do want to make sure that the top of the counter or the lav rim is no higher than 34 inches. These are really great design features, and we're seeing these all over the place, for safety reasons, for, germ control and whatever, which is just having, one faucet, put your hands underneath and the water comes out, accessible. Now I think this is kind of a goofy thing. They insulated one pipe. I mean, if I were designing this, I would just insulate all the pipes. Because you don't really know if the person in a wheelchair, okay, maybe they're going to look underneath and they're going to say, oh, that one's insulated, that one's for me. But this kind of a situation, I would insulate all the pipes. So this is what I'm talking about when I'm talking about knee and toe clearance, like under the computer stations, under the table, under the sink. We're looking for space so that somebody can get under it and actually use whatever it is or write on the, be able to write or put their papers down or whatever. Now, I know sometimes people don't have a lot of room, and so they put in very shallow lavatories like this, but it's going to be difficult for somebody in terms of knee and toe clearance. The toe clearance is supposed to extend at least 17 inches under the sink. Do not use hospital-style lavs. They take up a huge amount of space. They're really appropriate for hospitals where the aide or somebody is going to be standing at the side of it and helping somebody wash their face or helping somebody brush their teeth. But they just take up so much space, and they require it's a greater reach for the person who's using it to get to the faucet controls, and if you've got dispensers. So same with the toilet rooms as with the entrances. If they're not all accessible, you want to direct people to the accessible restrooms. And again, the more information that's going to be helpful to people, the better. Priority 4 is drinking fountains, public telephones, which I don't think anybody has anymore, and emergency alarms. And this is one of the few, this is maybe like the only thing in the standards for people who are deaf, which is having visible alarms. And one of the things you want to think about is having a when you redo your alarm system, if you redo your alarm system, having a visible alarm in the bathroom, because the people who can hear are going to hear the alarm that's in the corridor or that's in the library, whatever. But someone who's deaf is not going to hear that. And then there's a whole section of the regulation that talks about maintenance of accessible features, and that is your lift, your elevator, your accessible parking, your walkways. So really need to shovel the snow and get rid of the ice. The walkways themselves, the accessible routes, those are accessible features, so that those need to be maintained. We don't want to see things like that where somebody put the dumpster in the access aisle for the accessible parking. Things like this. Now, what I find often the bathroom is designed correctly, but that means you've got extra space. And somebody's going to say, ooh, that's like the perfect space to put the garbage can. But now we're in the maneuver and clearance. So you want to keep your eye on that, making sure that those spaces are maintained the way they were designed. So I want to talk about some non-design things for people with other kinds of disabilities, and we're at 11:07 and we're going to 11:30, so we have time. But I do want to know, do you have questions about what I've presented so far? Or
Kathy, this
comments?
is that somebody put in the chat, and I think other people are probably having the same thing, just in a very, very small library, where to start. And I mean, you have addressed some, the things that are required and some that are not, but where to start, who to talk to.
Where to start? Well, I would start with getting people in the building. Where are you going to do that? Do you have room to put in a ramp? You can put in an exterior lift. People don't like them. People don't like using exterior lifts. They feel like they're on display. In New England, it's a maintenance issue, but the place you start is getting people in the building. I did see a library in, I think it was Northampton, Massachusetts, where they actually took a window and made it into a door. Excuse me, because they had a historic entrance. Excuse me. So I think the first thing you're looking at is creating an accessible route from parking. If people are generally parking and not walking to your library, then I would start with the parking. If you're in a more urban area, which I don't think most of you are, but even in a small town, people are going to be walking to the library. But you could choose one or the other, choose whichever entrance is going to be easier and less expensive to make accessible. So we're looking for an accessible route, and then we're looking to get in the building. That's really where we start. If people can't go to the toilet, not everyone's spending a lot of time in the library. I don't spend a lot of time in my library. If I never go to the bathroom in the library. So, that would not be the first thing I would do. But the first thing you want to do is to get people in the building. And so we didn't talk about door width, and I should have talked about door width, because that's another issue, not just the threshold, but the width of the door opening needs to be at least 32 inches clear, measuring from the door. When you've opened it 30 degrees, you're measuring from that door to the door frame on the other side. That's another big issue for libraries and for older buildings, is the door opening width. So these are expensive things. I mean, we recognize that. Congress recognized it, and unfortunately, they didn't really provide any money. But that's where I would start.
Okay, thank you. That's really helpful. I'm really glad you mentioned the snow, removal kind of thing, because one thing that I've noticed in, even in the town where I live and some other areas where in the wintertime, in the town where I work as well, there's no accessible way for people to get, the library might be accessible, but the snow is shoveled and piled up in such a way that they actually can't get there. And it's not the library's property. It's not like the library's fault. It's, but it still makes their building inaccessible. So, I mean, maybe that's something to take up with the town, but I just wanted to comment on that because I have seen it several times up here in Vermont. There's a question, is there a resource to know the number of people in a community with accessibility needs, or is there an organization who would have an idea of this?
Probably not, unless you've done a survey. No, I mean, there wouldn't be anybody who would have those figures. The census is already a little bit old, and the census isn't, I don't think the census is by municipality. So I don't think there's anybody who's going to have that information.
Well, so related to that, does that matter? I mean, does that affect what things you would do, or would you need to do what you need to do, even if there's one person, or even if you're not sure if there's one person?
Yeah, you do need to do what you need to do, and you've needed to do it since 1992. So as I said, it's not exactly, hot news, but all of the things that I've been talking about, assessing your building and then making the access improvements. I think if every town had really started to do that in 1992, 30 years later or whatever, we would have budgeted it and we kind of would have been done. So, but yeah, it does not matter. You may not have anybody who uses a wheelchair in town, but yeah, the ADA doesn't work that way. You don't kind of make those determinations.
Well, and a follow-up question from that person, which might be more what she was getting at, what's the best way to reach them with messaging? So,
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't understand.
No, I didn't either. Extrapolating.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you brought that up, because every town is supposed to have some notification system for people with disabilities to let them know we're in compliance with the ADA. And if you need somebody, or if you want to file a complaint, towns with 50 or more employees have to have an ADA coordinator, somebody who's designated as coordinating their ADA obligation. So we recommend that there's information on your website. If I think most libraries have a separate website from the town website. Any social media that you use, generally, however you're communicating with the public, you're going to catch the folks with disabilities, or you're going to catch somebody whose grandmother has a disability or something like that. So it's really any way that you communicate with the public. The other thing is that municipalities are supposed to know which buildings are accessible and which parks are accessible and things like that, and which aren't, and what parts of them aren't, and let people know that. So if your library is not accessible, or if it's the back entrance, or if you don't have a way to get to the second floor, that information should be on your website. And then, what should people do about that? The librarian is available. We've got the historic maps collection on the second floor, or whatever it is you have. We do not yet have an elevator or lift. If you need assistance, please ask the librarian. So you want to let people know what do you got and what don't you have, and what's your plan. If you've got a plan, that's good. But it's kind of know before you go. And you see that a lot of places, a lot of visitor places, a lot of museums and things like that, they will have that kind of information so that people are prepared, particularly historic museums. They will let people know you can't get to the second floor, but we have a video of the second floor on the first floor. So you want to give people the information, but in terms of reaching people, it's just how you generally reach people.
Okay, thank you. And here's a question that I know we've gotten a lot. If you start an accessible project on a building, do you have to do it all, or is it okay to do it in stages?
It's fine to do it in stages. I think what the Department of Justice would look for if somebody were to file a complaint is, do you have a plan? And does your plan include timelines? And does your plan include who's responsible to make those access improvements? So way back in 1992, every municipality was supposed to develop a transition plan. And the transition plan had those elements. What's your barrier? What's your solution? Who's going to be in charge of doing it? And when is it going to be done by? So yes, they're going to be looking for a plan. So, I mean, does it all have to be done at once? No. But all of this was supposed to have been done way back in the 90s. Yeah, but have a plan,
Okay, and that's all that's in the chat right now. Thank you.
Okay. So I'm going to talk about like some non-structural stuff. And if you have questions, with what we've talked about, please pop in. But there's a whole section of the regulations that address people who are blind, people who are deaf, people who have speech disabilities. And we're required to provide what are called auxiliary aids and services. So I'm going to go over some of those auxiliary aids and services. So, your library is sponsoring a poetry reading. You're going to be handing out a program with the names of the poets, the names of their poems. You receive a call from a person who is blind who requests that the program be provided in Braille. So this is an obligation that you have. And what are you going to do? Going to tell them your library doesn't provide that service? No. Are you going to contact the town's ADA coordinator? Well, if your town has more than 50 employees, you are supposed to have, there should be an ADA coordinator. So you might want to contact that person, or just you figure it out for yourself. We use an organization, we use a business in Florida to Braille our material. But there's lots of things you can email the file to one of the businesses and they will mail you back the Braille material. Now, I have not had a request for Braille in at least 5 years. It's my generation really who learned Braille. The next generation, it was all audio. People didn't learn Braille. This generation is all, high tech, and I'm going to go over a little bit of the high tech. There's Louis Braille. So people who are blind use screen reading technology and has audio output so that audio is reading everything on the computer. And some people use what's called refreshable Braille, where they're just holding their finger over it and it's going through. Now, you don't have to provide this technology for people. They've got it themselves. But one of the things you do want to think about is having screen reading software on your computer, at least one computer at the library, because somebody might come in and want to use your computer. And there is free screen reading software, nvaccess.org. The other thing, if you haven't already done this, is to have a magnifier. So this is going to be for people, obviously, with low vision. And then also having some material in print. There's no requirement to have books in large print, although I know a lot of libraries do. But if you've got handouts and things like that, you want to consider having them in a large font in addition to regular font. And if somebody makes a request, you're going to provide it in whatever size the person needs. I was doing a workshop and I was handing out some stuff, and I had somebody who contacted me and they wanted everything in 40-point font, which is quite large. It's easy to do that. It's voluminous. You have a lot of paper, but I provided that for her and she was thrilled. She held it up to her eyes and she said, "Oh, this is so great. I can follow along." But in general, if you're providing brochures or things like that, you want to have some, you're not required to, recommend have some material in large print, either 20-point font, something like that. If you're developing captions, this is not the captions, this is not the videos that you rent. This is the videos that you create. They need to have captions for people who are deaf. This is another technology. You might be asked to provide this if you're having an event. This is for people who are become deaf later in life, called late deafened. So they don't know sign language. Sign language is difficult to learn. And so English, or, is their language, it's the language they're comfortable with. And so we've got cart reporters who are typing everything that everyone's saying, and also everything that people are hearing. So if there's a crash outside, let's say, they'll have a parentheses and they'll say crash. Or if everybody's laughing, parentheses laugh. And so we've got the cart stenographers. And then this on the left was a event at the governor's office. It was a press conference. And so we had a little setup where you can see the sign language interpreter and the cart. So people who are deaf had an area to sit in. And the one on the right is a UX access board hearing. And this is also great technology for people who are not native English speakers, because they hear English and they're going to be able to read it also. So nice technology. Assistive listening devices for people who have some hearing, but they need it amplified. And you might get a request for this for an event that you hold. Again, this is, town's obligation to provide this if somebody requests it. And if you have one, then you have to have a sign that's letting people know that it's available. And this is the international symbol of hearing loss. The other thing you want to think about is web accessibility. And I'm not sure if the library is creating their own websites or it's just a part of your town's website, but I'll just go over a few things what web accessibility means. It means that someone's able to use the website without a mouse. Someone who's blind is not going to be able to use a mouse. Other people are not going to be able to use a mouse. So what I recommend to people is see if you can use your website with keyboard controls. And that's the tab key. That tab key is going to take you all through the website. And then you want to make sure if there's a form that somebody can submit the form with the enter key, not just with the mouse. Images need to have a text description because when someone's blind, their screen reader comes to the image, they don't have a clue what it is. So there's a place that you write alt text. It's not difficult to do. You click on the photo, right click, and there's a place to put an alt text. And then I talked about providing captioning on videos. So questions, comments, suggestions, things that you've done that would be helpful for other people to know. We're open now. Silence. Joy, anything in chat?
Not so far.
Okay.
Put an evaluation link and people are, there's a comment that this was amazing and so useful.
Yeah, I don't know why my hand is up. Well, we have a few minutes. I'm kind of interested in hearing, I heard from a few of you who've got plans in place, the lift, or you've done stuff. I mean, a few others of you willing to speak up and say what you've done that would be helpful for other people to hear, or kind of where you're at, or what you're planning. So, we're sharing a little bit about where you're at, or what the difficulties are besides money. Do you have very tight space, not have enough room?
About, is there a free consultant that can help a very small library?
I'm sorry.
Is there a free consultant that can help a very small library? I'm assuming.
Yeah, that would. I'm not sure about free consultant. You can try calling the Vermont Center for Independent Living. If you, Peter Yonke, Jonke, very nice fellow. And there are other people there. So the Vermont Center for Independent Living is in Montpelier, but I think they might have a few other offices. I would also recommend, if you have an architect in your community, that you pull him or her in. Yeah, there aren't really, it's not a lot of free resources in terms of consultation.
I did put a link to the Vermont Center for Independent Living in the chat. There's a question too about good guidelines if we need to retrofit.
Yeah, well, I recommend looking at the checklist that I talked about, adachecklist.org, because the standards are a little bit complicated. And I think the checklist is good because we tried to do images that kind of put things together, and there are a lot of images. So I think that would probably be your probably most helpful resource.
Okay, I put the ADA checklist link in the chat as well. And somebody asked, and I know this is a common thing, we have books on very high shelves and very low. Any advice for where to place signs notifying patrons that the librarian help is to access is available? Yeah,
well, I think that's really going to be a very individual determination. Walk in your building and see, where's the logical place to put a sign. Certainly at the checkout, I assume all of you have sort of a checkout area, but you want to think of catching people, early on. So you really, that's going to be extremely individual, where is it going to make sense when people come in the door? And then also, as I said on your website, that would be really important too, if you have a website. I know your town probably has a website. I'm not sure every library has its own page. But if you do, that would be a really good place to put it as well.
Do you know that if the insurance that covers the library would be able to enforce these requirements along with the Vermont League of Cities and Towns?
If the insurance would be able to enforce it, is that what you said?
Yes.
Yeah, no, the insurance. I'm not sure I understood.
Yeah, I guess, Stacey, do you mean like, would they be able to like fine you for not doing it, or would they be able to provide help for it?
Well, I mean, that's a very good question. The Americans with Disabilities Act is a federal law that's enforced by the Department of Justice. And so really wouldn't have anything to do with your insurance. Somebody could also file a private lawsuit if they wanted to. So it's either private lawsuit or it's the Department of Justice. Now, the other thing in Vermont is that you have a state law that's comparable to the ADA. And sometimes people file complaints with that state agency. I think it's called the Vermont Human Rights Commission. And then they're filing it not under the ADA, but it's comparable in terms of the requirements. But it doesn't have anything to do with your insurance company. Insurance.
Yeah, I think she was wondering if they could could they be fined for it? She doesn't have a microphone, so she's elaborating in the chat.
No, I don't think your insurance would fine you. No.
And then there's a question, a sort of suggestion: could libraries provide call buttons on floors when somebody needs assistance? I guess in lieu of signs or in addition to signs.
A call button like outside or inside?
I don't know, Lynn, do you want to explain that? Maybe a call button to access the librarian at the desk to come get help. It seems to me in most of our libraries that they're small enough that that might not be necessary, but.
Well, I was referring to the previous question or comment about books being very high off the floor. But if somebody who has unfortunately had an accident upstairs, somebody who's disabled or otherwise, or who wouldn't even declare themselves, call themselves disabled, had some sort of a situation, there's no resource on higher floors, and they're away from security, they're away from the librarians at the circulation desk. So I noticed that there are retail stores that have devices that are available to customers to make purchases very quickly. So I would think that by now there may be resources for creating call buttons. That's just what I was looking at. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, we're at 11:30, everybody. Thank you so much for your attention and for your questions and for your input. Apologies again for our rough start. I hope everybody got in who wanted to get in. And please feel free to contact me, with any questions. I'm glad to talk to anybody. So I'm going to stop sharing. And Joy, do you want to say any last words?
Just thank you everyone for attending, and I also do apologize for the hiccups at the beginning, but it's great to have you all here and great that you're thinking about these things. If you have questions that you want me to pass along to Kathy, just feel free to do that, and we will share the recording as well on our website and on Niche Academy and YouTube.
Bye, everybody.